Hello and welcome to the Vipercast. I'm Matt Donnelly. That's Tara Roberts, and we're going to break down some Chiefs versus the Baltimore Ravens here. Right now, the Ravens, they are 3.5-point favorites right now with the over-under set at 45. When we take a close look at this, one team comes in this contest healthy, the other, not so much. Let's take a look. Mark Andrews, he looks like he's coming back for the Baltimore Ravens. We'll talk about that here in a second. Marlon Humphrey, Deshaun Phillips, these guys look like they've probably been limited throughout practice this week, and their status is questionable. That being said, on the other side, probably the biggest loss is Joe Thuney, who will not play this week for the Kansas City Chiefs, which leaves a major void along that offensive line, which we know about the Baltimore Ravens and their ability to get after the quarterback, a league-leading 60 sacks this season. Now, when we look at this game, Tara, the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, they are making their sixth straight AFC Championship trip. This time, this one is on the road where they are the underdogs. Here, you have two of the most electric quarterbacks in the game today and a pair of former NFL MVPs there looking for that trip to Las Vegas. Mahomes and the Chiefs, they have been, well, not quite Mahomes and the Chiefs as of late, as far as this offense has been concerned. Their identity has been tied to that defense for much of the season. Now, when we take even a little bit of a closer look at this, Lamar Jackson basically promised Ravens fans that this day was coming. Back on his draft day, he said he would get this team a Super Bowl. And right now, when we look at this, he's well on his way. As far as the weather's concerned, Tara, 40% chance of rain in the forecast, a high of 49. And of note, and I think this is key here, of note, of the Ravens' 13 wins this season, they have won 10 games against teams 500 or better. And if you look at what they've done recently against those good teams, it's not that they've been beating them. They've been beating them bad. We're talking 24-0 in the second half against the Texans. I mean, this team right now, the Ravens, they are a team to be reckoned with. What are you looking for in this contest? How do you see this thing kind of playing out?
Oh, I see this one hopefully going exactly how I want it. The Ravens winning here. And hats off to Kansas City for turning things around. They went through that horrible slump there where things just were not clicking on the offense. And to their credit, they pulled stuff together and found a way to get the ball to Rashee Rice more. That is what I really feel has been the key for the turnaround for their offense. But at the end of the day, I still think that this is really just Lamar Jackson's year, and I'm looking forward to it. So I see this one. I see this one heading Lamar's way for his MVP season.
Well, when you look at this Chiefs team, if they're going to have success, it's going to be from these players on the offense. We know this defense is going to come out there and they're going to play as good as they can against this Baltimore Ravens offense, which, by the way, is scoring like 32 points per game. They're only giving up 17. And if you look at all the major statistical categories on defense, Baltimore is number 1 or number 2. So it's going to be tough sledding for this Chiefs offense. But is there a player that you trust on the Chiefs team? And who's a player you're fading as far as maybe fantasy is concerned?
I trust Rashee Rice. I know it's a really difficult matchup, but again, he has just shined on another level. For me, he's the Amon-Ra St. Brown of this draft class. I mean, obviously a little bit higher draft capital here, but in terms of expectations and the way that he surged in the back half of the season, what I expect for him in 2024, I'm just absolutely obsessed with his skill set and the way that he's pulled through for Kansas City. So despite the difficult matchup, I do feel like he's got big game capabilities, and I am comfortable starting Rashee Rice. So that is my start there.
And then who are you sitting here? Because, I mean, this offense for me with the Kansas City Chiefs, it has me concerned as far as fantasy production is concerned here altogether. Because when you look at those one and done contests, typically you want a team that's about to get eliminated here. But you can't really trust a whole lot of these Chiefs players. Who's that one player that you're basically fading altogether?
I don't want to steal your thunder on here, but I mean, when you're looking at all the quarterbacks in these matchups, I mean, there's two in particular that shine in terms of not matchup and upside, really. And I just don't feel like Mahomes is one that you have to start here. Unfortunately, no offense to him, I feel like I've been beaten up on him, but from a fantasy perspective, the upside just hasn't really been there. So it's Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, when I look at the Chiefs that I start, there's one guy that I really trust, Rashee Rice. He's got that little bit of an ankle injury that may or may not factor into the whole thing when it's all said and done. Travis Kelce is the one player that I actually have faith in when it comes to this Chiefs team. You can't trust these other pass catching options, especially if their names are Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Kadarius Toney, who is also on the injury report. When we look at this Chiefs pass catchers, if the Chiefs are to have success, someone has to step up, not named Kelce and not named Rice. And you look at that, Mecole Hardman, Richie James, Kadarius Toney, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. None of these guys screams to me a value play here. Baltimore, they've been one of the top defensive units all season long. We talked about that. And they've been proven to be good against both the run and the pass. And they continue to get after that quarterback. That's 60 sacks there. They've basically got more interceptions than they have touchdown passes allowed. And I'm going to bring that up when I talk about Patrick Mahomes, who is my sit this week, because he hasn't been good. He hasn't been Patrick Mahomes as far as fantasy is concerned. He's still winning games with this Kansas City Chiefs team. That is good. But not when we look at these fantasy matchups. In the playoffs, 477 passing yards, 3 touchdowns in 2 games, and he faces his defense here that I mentioned, more interceptions than passing touchdowns allowed, 60 sacks this season. Toney, he's out of it. That's going to be a big hole on the offensive line for the Chiefs. Baltimore, they're only allowing 17 points per game. They shut out the Texans in the second half. What more can you expect from this Ravens team? Say what you want about the Texans. I'll be honest, I will take C.J. Stroud in fantasy and his weapons over what Patrick Mahomes has done and what his weapons look like this season. So, I mean, I think the Texans were a bigger challenge for this Ravens team for them to be defensively challenged this season. I don't see how Kansas City can stress this Ravens unit. Now, when we talk about that Ravens unit, who's a player that you're starting and who's a player you're sitting for fantasy?
I'm always starting Lamar. Fantasy, DFS, I mean, just everything. It is always, always Lamar. I mean, the offense runs through him. Touchdowns through the air are going through him, obviously. Touchdowns on the ground are going through him. The upside that he has in terms of fantasy value without having to put up aggressive pass volume is just it's immense. That said, he can also put up that pass volume if he has to. I just don't think this is a kind of shootout situation here with Kansas City and the way that their defense has been. Obviously, this will be more of a competitive defensive game, but Lamar will still put up points here, and he is the one who has the highest value. And absolutely, that is my must start for the Ravens.
And then on the other side, who are you sitting?
It's going to be Gus Edwards. And I feel like that's an easy one there for Gus Edwards. I mean, technically speaking, he is theoretically the lead back, but it's not really amounting to much. He is touchdown dependent. We do have Justice Hill that's been pulling through in terms of providing a little bit more fantasy upside as well. In terms of his involvement, you got Dalvin Cook coming in there, adding a little something too. So Gus Edwards, I just don't really think there's much upside, particularly when you're looking at all the other running back options that are available on all these other teams. I mean, there's just no need to go there with Gus.
Yeah, that's an interesting one with Gus Edwards, because I'll talk about another player in this Ravens backfield in a minute. But Lamar Jackson's an interesting one for me because he struggled most of the season when it came to the blitz. But against the Houston Texans that blitzed him 75% of the time, he completed 13 of 18 passes for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. We know Nola likes to mix it up there for the Chiefs unit there. He's going to have to really disguise what he does in order to get to Lamar Jackson. You blitz him, he beat him last week. You sit back and you let Jackson have a clean pocket, 105 passer rating from a clean pocket when not being blitzed. So Kansas City, they're going to have their hands full dealing with Lamar Jackson. And that's not even counting what he's going to be able to do with his legs, right? I mean, Lamar Jackson is just a different dude. You can game plan how you want. You can take all the stats. Kansas City's allowing X amount of fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Lamar Jackson, while he is a quarterback, he's so much more, which makes him such a threat every time he steps on the field. Now, I will say this, when I'm looking at this quarterback situation, especially those one-and-done contests, I could convince myself to play Patrick Mahomes if I've already started Lamar Jackson. And if I've already started Patrick Mahomes, I'm going to start Lamar Jackson and hope one of these guys from the NFC is that quarterback that I can get in the Super Bowl. So you're kind of doing a little bit of a trying to figure out who can start, who can't start, and trying to make sure you have enough players here when it's all said and done, especially at the quarterback position, because that's a place you do not want to miss in those one-and-done contests. Now, for me, when I look at this, my Ravens start, I'm going to go with Isaiah Likely. Lamar Jackson, he has been able to spread the ball around. He spread it around again last week, 8 different pass catchers, and that's without Mark Andrews even being a factor in any of that. You put him into this equation, look out. Kansas City, they basically made Stephon Diggs look like Nelson Aguilar. I'm talking about the one who couldn't catch babies back in Philadelphia there. Balls going between his hands. That's what Stephon Diggs looked like against this Kansas City Chiefs secondary. And you know what? You look at this, third fewest fantasy points allowed this season to the wide receiver position. Make no mistake, Jackson, he is going to be this Ravens offense, tying into what you were just saying there. But it is worth noting that Dalton Kincaid, he led the Bills last week with 45 yards on 5 receptions. So if there's a play to be had, it's Isaiah Likely. And in one-and-done contests, this may be the time to use him, because if the Ravens are to advance, Mark Andrews is going to be available in your Super Bowl, and that's a big add in those fantasy contests. Now, as far as my sits are concerned, I'm fading basically anyone who's a pass catcher on this Ravens team. I mentioned that this Chiefs secondary is good, and I mentioned that Jackson is spreading the ball around here. So it's too much ball spreading around or too much getting everyone involved for anyone to be a real factor as far as fantasy is concerned. You look at what receiver you may start. Zay Flowers, he only had 4 catches, I think, for 41 yards last week. He was the leading receiver. That is not a guy I want to start this week. And again, if the Ravens do advance, whether it be the San Francisco 49ers or the Detroit Lions, that is a much better matchup against those secondaries than it is this week. You know, Tara, give me a sleeper here before we wrap up.
Well, let's go with Nelson Aguilar. You mentioned him, not catching babies and whatnot. He's catching them now. It's all good. He's good for, several targets. He's good for some big play opportunities. And on top of that, he does have some touchdown equity. I think at this point, he is a more reliable sleeper option than somebody like Odell. So if you need to go down to that bottom barrel type of option, I think Nelson Aguilar is someone that you can turn to.
All right, I'm going to stick with the Ravens here, and I'm going to go with Justice Hill. After I saw what James Cook did against this Chiefs run defense last week, I feel pretty good about Justice Hill. Look for that run-pass option to basically freeze those Chiefs linebackers. Spagnuolo, he's been playing a game of cat and mouse with Jackson. I mentioned that 75% blitz there last week. Jackson, he did throw for 120 yards. He was getting the ball out in the second half in 2.25 seconds as opposed to over 3 seconds in the first half. With all this extra attention being placed on Lamar Jackson, you have to feel that Hill will be able to capitalize when given an opportunity. He averaged 5.1 yards last week per carry against the Texans team. That has been much improved throughout the season and into the postseason as far as that defense is concerned. Again, I'm looking at what James Cook did against this Chiefs team, and I'm thinking Justice Hill, he may be that guy that's going to be able to put you over the top in those playoff contests, and he could be the X factor in this game. Now, Tara, give me a prediction. Who wins this game? Who loses? And, throw a score out there for while you're at it.
The Raven. Oh man, don't make me give a random score because I didn't think about this in advance, and now I got to do what makes logical math sense here. We're gonna go Ravens 27 and Chiefs 20. Yeah.
Ooh, you got that game closer. I got this game being a blowout. The Ravens have been blowing everybody out. It doesn't matter who they are. They're a good team. I mean, the closest game, I think, against a good team that they've had was the San Francisco 49ers, where they beat them by 14 points. They handled business with the Texans. They handled business with the Dolphins. This week, they're going to handle business with the Chiefs 31-17. Right on those averages there. The Ravens average 30 points per game or 32 points per game. They give up 17 points per game. This is it right here. Ravens 31, Chiefs 17, no doubt about it.